Well, good morning, everybody. Buenos días. I'm Santiago Canton. I'm a director of RFK Partner for Human Rights. And on behalf of the RFK Center for Justice and Human Rights Board of Directors, I would like to welcome all of you here today for the 29th Annual Human Rights Award for the Robert F. Kennedy Center. Let me, first of all, thank Ms. Kennedy and Megan Townsend from the Kennedy family, the members of the RFK Center Board, the chairman of the board, Orrin Kramer, as well as board members Larry Cox, Peter Edelman, Dick Iannuzzi, Elisa Massimino, Malika Saad Azar, and Phil Johnston. Let me also thank our Human Rights Award judges, Gay McDougall, Sashma Rahman, and Bill Schultz. And from the diplomatic community, Ibrahim Al-Shakar, Miriam Hooker, my friend Arturo Sarucán, the ambassador of Mexico, and Eduardo Zaqueu. Also here with us today is the RFK Human Rights Laureate, Dr. Kwan Nguyen. Robert Kennedy believed that every person can make a difference, and we should all work and try to make a difference, and we should all support those individuals that are making a difference. But his vision of the world was not just an abstract idea. He made sure that his ideas and his visions were translated into practical results. And for that reason, he joined the farm workers in California, he joined civil rights activists in the American South, and he joined Native Americans in Pine Ridge and beyond. Let me welcome now Dolores Huerta, who's joining the panel. So at the RFK Center for Justice and Human Rights and the Partner for Human Rights specifically, we followed Robert Kennedy's ideals by supporting and working with those individuals all over the world that are also making a difference. And for that reason, this year, we have given the award to an extraordinary person that is working with farm workers in New York to make sure that equality and dignity is also for farm workers in New York. And for that reason, we gave the award to Librada Paz here today. Before we continue, let me also thank, there is a group of farm workers, I don't know where they are, but they came all the way from New York to be here with Librada, so thank you for coming and to support Librada. And a very warm welcome to Librada's family, to her parents, to her sisters and brothers, and many of them came all the way from the middle of Oaxaca, Mexico, also to be with Librada here today. To introduce Librada, I would like to welcome RFK Center President Kerry Kennedy, whose dedication to farm worker justice is a driving force behind our partnership with Librada. For 30 years, Kerry has traveled the globe, leading human rights delegations in more than 60 countries, including the US. Kerry started this year in Mocali, Florida, breaking fast with farm workers on the anniversary of the day her father offered the Eucharist to Cesar Chavez. And she spent last weekend with Librada and myself in upstate New York investigating abuses against farm workers and touring the living and working conditions they deal with every day. And you will hear from Kerry how awful the situation for farm workers is in upstate New York. She's one of New York State's most vocal advocates for the Farm Workers Fair Labor Practices Act, a bill that, if passed, has the potential to revolutionize labor conditions for more than 60,000 farm workers in the US. And we hope that today, with all your support, will be the first day to make sure that 2013 will be the year that we will be able to pass that legislation in New York State. Please welcome Kerry Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody and apologize so much for keeping you waiting. And I'm sure when you hear from Librada and Dolores, you'll think that your wait was worthwhile, but I apologize for that. I want to also acknowledge Kat Townsend, who's here, my niece, my goddaughter, and Michael Kennedy. And I want to thank Senator Harkin and Congressman Cohen for joining us. And I also really want to thank, none of this would be possible without the extraordinary RFK Center staff. So we have Lynn Delaney, who's our executive director, and Santiago, who you've just met, and then John Heffernan, who runs our Speak Truth to Power education program, and John Zurich, who is our COO, and all of the other staff. So could all the staff stand up, and we want to thank you. Hey, Europe. Today, we honor, of course, my father, Robert Kennedy, and I think it's so amazing to be in this room because this is, of course, the room where he announced that he was running for president. It's the room where his brother, John Kennedy, announced he was running, and Teddy joined us for so many of these, for every one of these ceremonies throughout his life. So it's very meaningful to be here. But you know, a week before my father announced for the presidency in 1968, he was with Dolores and Cesar Chavez in California. So to me, on my father's birthday, it makes so much sense that we are once again sitting in this room and celebrating the amazing contribution of farm workers to our society, but also joining together again in his name to fight this unfinished battle for civil rights in our country. When I was a kid, my father and my extraordinary mother taught us all to pray before meals. And the prayer we said was, "Thank you, God, for this good food, and thank you for the hands that made it." And the farm workers are the hands that made it. Today, along with Daddy, we honor Librada Paz and New York State's 60,000 farm workers. For New York, farming is the backbone of our upstate economy, and agriculture is arguably New York's most important industry. New York's 35,000 farms make up a $4.5 billion industry. It is a leading agriculture state, providing New Yorkers and people across the country with dairy, fruits, vegetables, maple syrup, and other produce. More than that, farming is an essential part of our cultural heritage. New York State was settled by yeoman farmers, and our history was made by the women and men who worked our land. In order to strengthen this critical industry and safeguard the farmers whose year-round toil is essential to our health, our economy, and our heritage, we must take steps to assure that farmers and farm workers' interests are protected, and that the industry develops in a manner which is sustainable over the long term. The Farm Workers Fair Labor Practices Act, which we expect to see reintroduced in the New York legislature this year, will address many of these concerns and will have a positive impact on the farming industry across the state. As of today, passing this legislation is the top priority of the Robert F. Kennedy Partners for Human Rights. Today, perpetrators of exploitation have an economic incentive to abuse workers, demand 95-hour work weeks at minimum wage without overtime, proffer unspeakable housing, and deny workers a day off per week. This bill will even the playing field for the farmers who treat their workforce with dignity and already provide their workers basic humanitarian needs. It will strengthen, not threaten, our agricultural economy. The bill will provide a safe way for women workers who have been sexually assaulted by their superiors to complain without fear. Today, those women fear losing their jobs, their husbands' jobs, their housing, their children's education, or deportation, all consequences which abusers are currently able to exploit in order to continue to prey upon the women whom they employ. The unemployment rate has skyrocketed across New York State. Many American citizens, desperate for jobs, will not take jobs as farm workers in New York because they know that a decent wage, a day off per week, overtime pay, workers' compensation, collective bargaining, and other benefits will be denied to them. All of these are now commonly withheld from the estimated 60,000 farm workers laboring in our fields, and better working conditions will make these jobs attractive to unemployed across our state, transforming lives and helping depressed communities. The legacy of Jim Crow lives today in New York, resulting in slave-like conditions for children, women, and men across our state. People are stuffed into overcrowded shacks. They cannot afford adequate food despite laboring to feed our people. Blackened by pesticides and filth in the fields after 15 and 16-hour days of back-breaking labor, many have little access to running water. One worker camp we visited last weekend forced 19 laborers to stand in line for a single John and one shower in the tin trailer that they all share. Drudgery, subjugation, and humiliation characterize the life for people who plant our vegetables, pick our fruit, and milk our cows. Some time ago, I went to a small community, ironically, just outside Liberty, New York, where each day gruesomely exploited farm workers must each force-feed approximately 350 ducks in a row by holding each duck between the worker's knees, elongating its neck, yanking open its beak, and shoving a long electrical funnel down its throat. This process is sustained torture for worker and duck alike, stretching around the clock in 4-hour shifts. So they start at midnight and they go till 4 a.m., then 8 a.m. until 12 noon, and then 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., and they start again at midnight. The workday, during that entire period, the worker never sees more than 4 hours off in a row. He is paid minimum wage, and though he earns it, he is denied the overtime pay due to him. Overtime pay paid to every deli worker in New York City. If he dares to attempt to form a union or collective bargain, he can be fired. I asked one of those farm workers when he gets a day off. He said, no, we don't get a day off. I said, well, after a week, do you get Sunday off? He said, no, we don't get that day off. I said, after 22 days, because that's how long it takes to fatten up a duck enough to slaughter. And he said, no, because there are more baby ducks coming in. I said, how about Christmas? Do you get Christmas off? He goes, no, ducks got to eat on Christmas. I said, when do you get a day off? He said, I worked here for 10 years without a day off. 10 years with that round-the-clock schedule. I asked if he gets any benefits, and he said no, he gets no benefits, but he does get housing. And I said, okay, so what is the housing like? He said he lived in a 10 by 14-foot room with 2 married couples and 3 single men for 10 years. All this is legal in the state of New York today. Terrifying conditions such as these are the reality for thousands of workers on chicken farms, dairy farms, vegetable fields, and fruit orchards. Workers who complain can be fired. Children 14 and 15 years old make $3.20 an hour. All that is still legal in New York, and we have got to put an end to it. But it gets worse. I personally spoke with over 24 farm workers from across the state. Every single woman I spoke with had been sexually assaulted, badgered, or brutalized by her male boss. It is long past due for our leadership in Albany to stand up for women in this state, instead of giving lip service to women's rights while allowing abusive and violence to flourish with no accountability. In the 1930s, when Congress passed the New Deal labor laws, it provided protection for practically every member of America's workforce, except for farm laborers. The farm owners and Dixiecrats in Congress simply didn't want to kill the golden goose by giving their African-American workers benefits that would cost the growers money, cause them inconvenience, or put the sons of slaves on par with white factory owners. Consequently, farm laborers never received the rights most workers take for granted. Farm laborers are regarded almost as chattel, and they still are. Because they have no duty to pay workers' comp, some farmers disregard basic safety precautions like gloves in cabbage fields. And so if a worker loses a finger, he is simply fired, and they hire somebody else to take his place, just like chattel. And like chattel, workers are thought of as barely human. Izzy Yanni, who is one of the owners of Hudson Valley Foie Gras, was asked about the lack of rest for farm workers. And his answer was so racist, he said that farm workers do not have what many of us regard as universal needs and aspirations. He said this notion, quote, this notion that they need to rest is completely futile. They don't like to rest. They want to work 7 days, unquote. In fact, farm workers, like all of us, want time with their families. They want wages that make leisure or a better education possible, and the chance of lifting themselves out of poverty to be more than a pipe dream. While other states have jettisoned the archaic laws that kept farm workers in misery and poverty, New York institutionalized these egregious labor conditions by passing laws that reaffirmed the federal exclusions. It is time to rectify the injustice and bury Jim Crow. That's why the RFK Center has committed ourselves to passing the FFLPA legislation, which is the first step in addressing some of the most egregious violations of international human rights perpetrated against farm workers in New York today. As Senator of New York, Robert Kennedy visited farms outside Rochester, investigating abuses against workers there. And on one visit, a farmer pointed a shotgun at his chest and told him he was trespassing. Last weekend, that scene, minus the shotgun, was repeated when Librada and I and Santiago and Salvador and a few others on a delegation from the RFK Center went to look at conditions near Rochester. Librada, Being here with you, and especially with Dolores, reminds me of another scene with my father and farm workers. As I said earlier, right before the week before he announced for the presidency, my father went out to see Cesar, and he addressed a crowd of 6,000 farm workers. And he said, quote, "When your children and grandchildren take their place in America, going to high school and college and taking good jobs at good pay, when you look at them, you will say, I did this. I was there at the point of difficulty and danger. And though you may be old and bent from many years of labor, no man will stand taller than you when you say, I marched with Cesar." There are few people in this room today, although there are some, who are blessed enough to be able to say, I was there, I marched with Cesar. But today, all of us have the opportunity to join Librada's struggle. And when we are old and bent, we will turn to our children and our grandchildren and say, I was there at the point of difficulty and danger. I marched with the New York farm workers. And for that, I thank all of you. Si se puede, si se puede, si se puede. And now it is my tremendous honor to ask Mrs. Ethel Kennedy to present the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award to Librada Paz.
I have no word how to describe what I've been through at this moment. It's history. But before I go through my speech, I want to express something I think it is important. I want to thank my son, Brandon, my little one, and my husband. They've both been so sick, and they are here. So that's the most important thing, that they are here. Nantakwa, tachavindira to weni, nya inga weni yo, chikanjo avachi venira, sa weni lucha vachi weni yo.
I want to thank each and every one of you for making the journey here today.
Bari, ta'i wenira kanunjo agui nume indi iso weni yo.
Because your presence is very important to me.
Nantakwa tachavipa yumayo ya vachi na chica, chico familia yo vachi na chica manja, dua ya chinyu goyo.
And especially to my parents who have come all the way from the state of Oaxaca in the south of Mexico.
Nyun Davi, nyus noviko vachi.
I am of the indigenous Mixtec people.
Inyun Davi ya nyu yataga no susa nyu yora nya. Nyuna, chi saana, chi yana, chi costumbrena.
A people with a history older than the United States, a people with their language, their dances, their culture.
Sani kwesaba benyunda bilu kwena ye nya chinu ye jiga sani kwetsa kukini kwika sabanyu.
Like so many indigenous people in our region, our people are very culturally rich.
Chate kwancho agwenyunda bi ni janunda bigaso kwetsa kukini kwanya yeno vas llevando yo kundasichita anda kwa satachita kwemego kwetinisaso kuyazaniya kwebanja kata.
But most have known only poverty, discrimination, and abandonment by a society that has turned their back on them for decades.
Nyunda bi chi cultura nya chi costumbre nya chi nya sa nya chinda ago kweni kwa naira na sa lucha mas nawa.
This is a people whose language, culture, and arts are at risk of extinction.
A los 15 años vine en este país, tomé la difícil decisión de salir de mi casa y hacer un largo camino al norte.
When I was 15 years old, I made the difficult decision to leave my home and make the long journey north.
Pensaba que mis posibilidades en mi pueblo serían muy pocas. Quería estudiar y progresar.
I knew that opportunities in my village would be scarce. I wanted to study, to advance.
Y seguí a mi hermana y vine a los Estados Unidos. Como millones de patriotas latinoamericanos.
I followed my sister and came to the United States, like so many millions of compatriots and Latin Americans.
¿Se imaginan dejar todo a los 15 años?
Can you imagine leaving everything behind at the age of 15?
Yo no quería venir.
I did not want to come.
Pero yo pensaba que si no venía, no tendría oportunidades de alcanzar mis sueños de estudiar de ingeniería y progresar.
But I knew that if I didn't come, I would not have the opportunity to reach my dream of studying engineering and advancing.
Y así es como yo llegué a este país. Y en lugar de estudiar, me encontraba piscando frutas y verduras en las fincas de este país.
And that's how I arrived to this country. And instead of studying, I found myself picking fruits and vegetables in the fields of this country.
Yo tenía solo 15 años, pero muy rápido aprendí en las fincas de los Estados Unidos. Debía trabajar al paso de los adultos.
I was only 15, but I quickly learned that in the fields of the United States, I had to work at the pace of an adult.
A los 15 años conocí el sufrimiento y la injusticia, la discriminación y la vulnerabilidad frente a los supervisores y contratistas.
At the age of 15, I learned of suffering and injustice, of discrimination and vulnerability, dealing with supervisors and contractors.
Lejos del calor y la defensa de personas que me pudieran ayudar y lejos de mi familia.
Far from the warmth and protection of persons who could help me, far from my family.
Por más de una década trabajé en la agricultura de este país y conocí condiciones inhumanas.
For more than a decade, I worked in agriculture in this country and knew of inhuman conditions.
En los campos, tú no importas,
In the fields, you do not matter.
ni tu seguridad, ni tus pensamientos, ni tu dignidad.
Not your security, not your thoughts, not your dignity.
Comenzando a salir en mi niñez, viví en lo que es vivir en los jornaleros en este país.
As I ended my childhood, I lived what so many day laborers live in the United States.
Las horas largas en el sol, el trabajo arduo y sin descanso,
Long hours in the sun, arduous work without rest,
la espalda dolorida de estar doblada por más de 10 horas trabajando en el día, el riesgo de enfermarse y lastimarse y perder el trabajo.
your back and pain from being bent over more than 10 hours a day, the risk of getting sick or having an accident and losing my job,
Y la enorme discriminación que sufrimos los trabajadores se multiplica en contra las mujeres que sufren en todo tipo de abuso.
and the enormous discrimination that all workers suffer is multiplied against women who suffer all types of abuses.
This is really hard for me. But this is how the dreams of so many farm workers are buried in the field of this country. I mean, can you imagine to go through in your 15 years and go around through all those abuses? Abuses occurs and you are alone, afraid and often threatened. This is what it means to be vulnerable. You cannot say, nor do anything. This is what it means when the legal system permits abuse. Justice becomes a word without any meanings. To Mrs. Gatto, to Carrie, to everybody, to all of you, to every single one of you who are here, I really thank you. This is so mean to me. So thank you all. Thank you. I really thank everybody. I just have no words to thank everybody. I know that just, amazing how many people are here, and I just can't start and can't finish, but yes, just thank you, every single one of you. And thank you today for this great recognition. I mean, it's just a dream that you wasn't expecting to happen. So I just don't know what to say, but just thank you, everybody, again, to be here. I know that you all came so far and to do all the effort to be here. So today, it's a very, very important for farm workers in the United States. Also today, it's a very important day for so many women and so many children who are working under all these conditions. Robert Kennedy says, once he said, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, we strike a blow against decency and justice. We know discrimination is wrong. It is not acceptable against African Americans in 1937 when discrimination against farm workers was made law. And it is not acceptable today. In New York, we are working to pass farm workers' labor practice law to end this discrimination. You remind us all that we are not alone. With the diversity and the strength in this room, we will pass and implement this law. I was able to realize my dream when I got my degree in engineering. My professor right here. But one dream follows another dream. Let us work to realize the dream of the life with dignity and free of discrimination. Please support our cause. Our cause is your cause, or my cause is your cause, or everybody's cause. So I'm sure that we can all do this. Can we do this? Yes. Can we do this? Yes. Acusaño. Acusaña. Okay. Sí se puede, sí se puede. Yes, we all can do it. So thank you very much. Thank you all. It's just so wonderful. Thank you.
Now, maybe because of language reason, you might not know this, but her name is Librada Paz. Librada means liberty, Paz means peace in Spanish. So basically her name is Liberty and Peace. Yes. And she's working for that. Every day she's working for that. She's making sure that farm workers in New York, farm workers in the US are free of discrimination, are free of abuses, and they can enjoy a life of dignity and equality as every other person in the US should. So thank you very, very much, Librada, for your bravery. Thanks a lot. Rights of farm workers in the US is clearly associated in the history with two names, Cesar Chavez y Dolores Huerta. They planted the seed for the farm workers movement in this country. They developed the movement in this country, and it's thanks to them that today farm workers like Librada Paz can walk into a path that was built by Cesar and Dolores. Así que es un verdadero honor presentar a Dolores Huerta en esta reunión. She made a wonderful contribution to the farm workers' rights. She, exactly 50 years ago, in 1962, together with Cesar Chavez, they founded the National Association of Farm Workers, and it's thanks to their effort, to the effort of Dolores and Huerta, that today farm workers' rights can have a movement to advance and to ensure that the effort that Librada is making in New York will finally conclude with this year, hopefully the next year, with the farm workers' bill passed by the New York Assembly. So please welcome Dolores Huerta.
Thank you very much. It's such an honor to be here with Ethel, with Carrie, with Librada. And all of you that are here, also we want to thank you very much for sharing this very special moment with us. I also want to tell you about my name, by the way. My name translated, Dolores, means sorrow or pain, and Huerta means orchards, okay? So it was interesting because actually Huerta was my divorced husband's name, and Cesar asked me to keep the name Huerta for that reason, because I meant sorrow in the orchards. And so here we are, sorrow in the orchards, and we're getting together with Librada, who will liberate the farm workers so they can have peace. Okay? And we know that with the support of Carrie Kennedy, Ethel, the Robert F. Kennedy Foundation for Human Rights, that this will happen in New York City. When we think of New York City as being like the intellectual soul of the United States of America, and where labor unions were first organized, for garment workers and all these other workers, that farm workers in this state still should not have even basic human rights. It's just a disgrace. It's a terrible disgrace. I know Librada, like myself, who was out there working with farm workers, and she has experienced firsthand, and she sees all of the abuses that farm workers have to go through, from pesticides to terrible housing, the abuse that they receive from their employers, that they're not treated as human beings. And when we think about what farm workers do, there is really no other occupation that all of us depend on as much as the farm workers that put the food on our table every single day. And if we can think that their work should be the most respected, the most dignified of all of the occupations we have in the United States, because we connect with farm workers every single time that we sit down to have a meal. And so that means that these abuses have to stop. As you all know, Robert F. Kennedy was very close to the farm worker movement. He was with us in Delano. He had fundraisers for us for our first clinic that we had. Robert F. Kennedy had fundraisers for us in California. And of course, he was there with Cesar when he ended his first 25-day water-only fast, where he only took communion and water for 25 days. But he was also supportive in so many other ways, and the Kennedy family has continued that support. And when you think, and I do want to say this, Ethel and Carrie, that your family are really the epitomes of people who fight for justice, because they are there, every single one of them, out there working for people that are needy, following Robert Kennedy's great tradition of fighting for human rights and fighting for justice. So could we just give them a big applause, okay? Just because they're so great. And you know, people remember the farm worker struggle in California as, you know, we were out there striking and boycotting and ancestors fasting and all of the marches that we did. But people don't always often know that part of everything that we did was also civic engagement for the farm workers. Part of the struggle was going out there and registering farm workers to vote, getting farm workers to go out to the streets, to knock on the doors, to get good people elected, as we did with Robert Kennedy when he ran in 1968, doing that strong civic engagement, that political base, to make sure that we could pass the laws that would help the farm workers. And we did pass those laws. We were able to get disability insurance for farm workers, unemployment insurance for farm workers, the right to organize for farm workers. We passed a law that would actually help farm workers when they didn't have enough earnings, aid to farm workers if they did not earn enough money. It was aid to children, aid to needy children of unemployed or underemployed parents. And these laws were passed by coalitions of people like yourselves that got together and, you know, put the pressure on the politicians so that they would pass these laws. So when we think of what we have to do here in New York and throughout the country is, again, reaching out to everybody there that really remembers the kind of debt that we owe to farm workers, and having them all come together and say to all of the people in the state legislature of New York, you've got to pass this law. This is not asking a lot. We're just asking that farm workers be treated with dignity, that they be treated with respect, that they are not abused, that they should not be working to be brutalized, that they can be working at a reasonable pace so that they do not put their health in danger, that women are not subjected to sexual harassment and sexual abuse the way that farm worker women, that the farm worker children, like Librada, will have a chance to go to school and to get an education. This is all that we're asking, just what every other single worker in this country has, every unionized worker in this country has, and many of the other benefits that we've gotten from labor unions. This is all that we're asking. So I think that the path is very clear of what we have to do. We have to, all of us who have friends in New York, organizations in New York State, that we reach out to them and say, look, we need your help. You know, this bill is very close to passing. This bill is very, very close to passing to give farm workers just some of the basic dignity that they deserve. And I think that if all of us work together, that we can make it happen, just like we did in California. I know it takes a long time. You know, it's 50 years now. In 1962, it's 50 years now. We celebrated this year when Cesar and I started the farm workers movement. And at the time that we started the movement, people said to us, how are you going to organize the farm workers? The farm workers, they don't have any money, they don't speak English, they're not citizens, they don't have any kind of a formal education. How can you possibly organize the farm workers? And what we did is we said to the workers, you have power. You have power. And they would say, what kind of power do we have? The power is in your person. And if you get together with other farm workers, this is the way that you will make the changes. And the main thing to understand that if you do not fight to make that change will never happen. We have to take that responsibility. And so I think that we can say this to all of us here, that we, all of us, have got to work to make sure that farm workers in New York State, and yes, in the rest of the country, that they will have the kind of dignity that they deserve. This is long overdue. The people that feed us should not be treated like slaves. They should not be treated like slaves. It is time for all of us to come together and say, ya basta. Enough is enough. It is time that farm workers in New York State, and thanks to Carrie Kennedy for pushing this and for being the leader and for bringing it to the world's attention that farm workers in New York State need to have this legislation passed that will give them some measure of protection. And we know it's not the cure-all, but it'll be a big first step so that farm workers will not have to face the abuses that they are now facing. We can do it all together, all of us working together. We can make it happen. As we like to say, si se puede. But before we do that, I want to give a big old viva for Librada for her courage, for what she's been through, and of course, in recognition of her award today. So, let me say just a couple of words in Spanish. Nomás quiero decir unas poquitas palabras en español, porque sabemos que lo que nosotros hicimos con los campesinos, con la ayuda y el apoyo de la familia Kennedy, también puede pasar en el estado de Nueva York. Y sabemos que hay personas ahí de buen corazón, porque la gente de este país tiene buen corazón. Y si nosotros hablamos con ellos y pedirles el apoyo para que ellos también puedan poner presión a los diputados en la legislatura de Nueva York, nosotros podemos ganar y pasar esta ley que en realidad ya es mucho más tiempo, porque sabemos que los campesinos son la gente que son los más dignos porque le dan de comer a todo el mundo. Y si trabajamos juntos aquí y en Nueva York también, podemos pasar leyes ahí para proteger a los campesinos, así como lo hicimos en California. Sabemos que toma mucho tiempo y mucha paciencia, pero trabajando juntos lo podemos hacer. Pero especialmente tenemos que hablar con todos los demás en las comunidades para que nos apoyen. Y ahorita voy a pedirles a todo el mundo que vamos a hacer unas vivas, especialmente aquí para Librada Paz, ahora en reconocimiento de ese honor que acaba de recibir de la Fundación de Roberto Kennedy, en nombre de él. So I'm going to ask everybody, I'm going to say, que viva Librada Paz, and all of you just shout, viva, very loud, all right? Just viva, okay? Can we do that? Okay. I'll go first. Que viva Librada Paz! Viva! Okay. Que viva Kerry Kennedy! Viva! Que viva Ethel Kennedy! Viva! And now we're going to do something different because we know we're going to do something different. We're going to do something different because we honor the spirit and the legacy of Robert Francis Kennedy. And I'm going to say, Robert Francis Kennedy, and I want everybody to say presente, which means he is here with us right now, okay? We'll just say presente. Robert Francis Kennedy. Presente. Robert Francis Kennedy. Presente. Robert Francis Kennedy. Presente. Okay, and now, are we going to do the work that we need to do to help Kerry and Librada and Ethel pass this Farm Labor Practices Act in New York State? What do we say? Yes. That's right. It says, yes, we can. So let's put our hands up and let's do it all together. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I know enough to know that after so many inspirational speeches, I shouldn't say anything more right now, so don't worry about that. Let me just recognize Stephen Bradbury back there. He's a civic organizer from New Orleans, also a winner of the RFK Human Rights Award a few years ago. Librada reminded us that she was alone when she was 15, facing all the injustices that she had and many other farm workers in the state of New York while working in the farms. Let's make sure, and next year we can do it, let's make sure that nobody else will go through again to what Librada went through. And the best guarantee for that is to passing legislation in the state of New York so farm workers will have the same rights than any other worker. So thank you very much for coming here, and please join us for the reception right now. Thanks.